In this tutorial, we're going to continue to create the eyes for our creature. We're going to use primarily the warp tool and a lot of airbrushing and a few layer tricks to make sure that we have cohesive and matching eyes. So let's jump right back into the project. All right, so let's continue to work on these eyes. I'm going to copy this guy, bring him back in this time. Now, I sped up the actual rendering portion so that I can move a lot faster and narrate more easily. And you won't have to sit here and watch me paint every single detail, but you'll be able to very easily get the gist of what's happening. So I scale my image that I brought in from the library and added a warp here. And I just want to make sure that the eye or the image that I have takes a cylindrical shape, or as if, an eye is a sphere. And so I want to make sure that it wraps around and appears to be the proper shape. And I don't have to get it perfect, but I want to get it to the point where it makes sense. And then I'll be able to erase and paint over. So you can see that I'm stepping back, having a good look at it to make sure that it fits properly and that it makes sense. And then, okay, let's see, we're going to go ahead and make a new layer here. And select the color and just go ahead and fill in the edge of the membrane. Ignoring the iris, we want to make sure we don't paint on the iris, but we want to make sure that we have enough to cover everything. And if you saw there was a quick blur, that's simply because I hit F11, my shortcut for my blur, and it gave me a much smoother transition into the actual color. So I'm just going to turn the opacity down here and see what the actual skull or what the head looks like so that I'll have an idea of what it is I need. Selected the layers and converted it to a symbol. And then I rasterized the symbol. So everything is one piece. And now I'm just cleaning up, turn my opacity down so I can clean up. And right there, I went a little too far, got a little carried away, and just erasing my edge. Now, we could do that one or two ways. I could also just put a mask on, and then I can go back and forth with the mask. But I'm pretty comfortable with creating this eye. So I don't feel like I have to throw a mask on in this case. Maybe I will in another one, but we're doing all right. So now I just want to put some of the highlights that I would get from an eye and take a step back and make sure that, it looks good still. And I want to, what I call, climb up the ladder in my color palette and add a few highlights here and go in and get a brighter pink or red, burgundy color and just create that wet membrane look on the edge of the eye just to show the reflection. And I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, refresh my library and drag and drop the same eye. And you can see how the library becomes a really important tool for us. Saves us a lot of time. We don't have to keep going into a folder or copying a layer, because sometimes as I work, I'll forget to copy that layer and I'll end up taking the layer I have that I have specifically brought in for this purpose, and I'll end up using it and painting over it. And then I have to go into the file, find that symbol, bring it back in, or find that JPEG or PNG and bring it back in. With the library, I know it's always going to be there. So in 6 months, I can say, oh yeah, that green eye I used, I just open up my library and grab it. One of the smart things that you can do is just stock your library, as I showed you earlier, with different images or different pieces that you're going to use for any project. So at some point, what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll make a library within my library, and I'll load all of the eyes that you saw in the last tutorial or at the beginning of this tutorial. I'll load them into my library. So in the future, I'll just open up my library, pull out whichever eye I need, and I'll go from there. It's a really, really helpful tool, and it'll certainly speed up your workflow. So still adding highlights, making sure that my eyes don't look flat. There we go, I had to erase that. Just, touching the edges, the rims of it. And sometimes, what will happen is as I move forward in a project, I'll come back and then I'll polish those even more. But for the sake of this tutorial, I don't want to spend too much time doing all of this, small time polishing that I can do later on. I really just want to share and show the technique that I'm using here. So I'm going to do the same thing again. Going to use the warp to create that spherical shape. And this is a little extreme, but I think it'll work. I'm just grabbing those handles and pulling. And I'm going to cheat a little bit because you can see it folded over there, but that's okay because what we'll do is erase and paint over it and we'll be okay. So select the color again. Now, how I select the color is by holding Alt while I have the brush tool, just a reminder, in order to select the color. So this keeps my artwork consistent and I don't have to pull up the color palette in order to follow suit. So let's go ahead and merge these guys together and render it out. So that's, for me, it's F1 and then F2. So F1 makes a smart object. F2 rasterizes a smart object. I'm going to bring a little bit of the lighter color there and put it on the edge so it's not too dark. And then bring a little bit of yellow throughout the entire sphere of the eyeball. It's just a much better look. And adding that artistic element to the project. And selecting the white color and giving that wet edge again. Showing a little bit of the bounce light from there. So I'm not being super scientific or technical, I guess is a better word, when I create the light. But generically, we have an idea of what that should look like. And so I just want to implement that in the project or in the process. And I think it's working fine. And like I said earlier, when I go back and I do a little bit of polishing, I'll be able to solve a lot of those problems there. Yeah, initially that shape didn't work out the way I wanted, so I'm going to have to try to tweak it and get it to turn the right direction. So undo that because that's not going to work. There we go. Start again, go back to the warp, pull those edges down. There we go. So I wasn't able to pull it to the extreme that I wanted, but I can work it and get the exact same results, just not as quick as if I could flip and bend that warp tool. Now there may be a way to flip and make sure you keep the edges behind. I am just not familiar with that way, so I just do it the hard way. And put it in place. And select a little bit of the color. There we go, put that back. All right. Select some of the color here and drop a new layer there. There we go. And start to paint. And just making sure that I use the consistent colors from eye to eye to keep it coherent visually and to keep it flowing. So this is turning out pretty well. I think the eyes are looking good. And I hit F11 to give me a nice blur so that the colors are transitioned well. And I can see that I want to take a little bit of that off. Merge that together, then rasterize it and start to clean it up. There we go. Now, this to me is the fun part. This is the part where, we really get to dig into the project and help bring it to life. So think about it in this way. We're going from macro, really big, to micro, really small. Meaning we start off with the basic form, making sure that those things look good, and that they make sense and visually it's appealing, which is why we have the extra layer where we can look at our artwork. And then once we get the silhouette down and the shapes down, then we're going to start to paint and polish and add the details. And yeah, this is the fun part. So we have one other set of eyes to do after this. I'm going to bring a little bit of this color in. There we go. Make it a little more natural, more menacing, ominous when the color spreads like that. Really like how this is turning out. Collectively, it looks good. So you see, I keep continuously stepping back to say, how does this translate collectively? So if I'm zoomed in and I'm looking at the eye, well, it may work up close, but not as well far away. It doesn't collectively work as one piece. So that's always something I want to keep my eye out for. So I'm going to use the same technique. I'm going to put a bit of a skew on it this time to get a better angle. And I'll warp. There we go. And we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to paint around. Going to select the base color and just start. New layer there. And the fun thing about a project is once you start moving and everything starts to work out, you really want to bury yourself in the project. The tough part is when things aren't working properly, when things aren't going the way that you envisioned it or in the direction that you needed to go. That's oftentimes when we want to kind of abandon a project and quit. But we have to sometimes forge forward. There's a saying we had in the military, you can't polish a turd. So if you find out, you realize that, look, this just isn't going to work. Sometimes you have to abandon it. But oftentimes, more often than not, it's really that your project just needs more work. And if you have the time to fail, it's a good idea to fail. And the reason why I say that is because in your failing and spending that extra time working in a project, you're still becoming more comfortable in Photoshop. You may even pick up or create new techniques that will help you in your endeavor to become a stronger illustrator or designer. So all is not lost. It can be a blessing and a curse at times. So I'm going to go with a brighter highlight because that eye should be a little closer to the light. It isn't hidden by a clef as much. So I'm going to just flip this guy over, save a little time, and make a few adjustments here, making sure that I don't go too far. Go back to the warp. There we go. It's taking on a good shape. Looking pretty good. Okay, so when we come back, what we're going to do is continue to paint and solidify the base colors. Pretty soon we're going to move back into the teeth, but we need to add a little more color and texture to our original drawing. So when we come back, we'll continue with that.